Hi, Linny.
Hi, Nancy.
Linny, guess what?
What?
We've done an entire year's worth of the Front Porch Book Club.
Woohoo!
We dropped our first episode in March of 2021, and now it's March 2022. So we are officially in season 2 of the Front Porch Book Club, but I think maybe that's just too complicated for us.
That might be.
I think we're just going to number our episodes from here on out.
That sounds good, Nance, because starting our second year in March is just it throws me a little bit.
It is a little confusing, really.
You know what? I think we should have some cake with our iced tea because it seems like a celebration.
Oh my goodness, yes. I'm going to have chocolate cake and cream and cheese icing. How about you?
That sounds interesting. I haven't had cake for a while, so I think anything would be good.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Welcome to episode 25 of the Front Porch Book Club.
Oh, the Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
So grab your book, cake, and iced tea and join us on the front porch.
Linny, I am super excited to talk with you about our book today. I can't wait to hear what you thought about it too.
Yes, our book today is No Ordinary Men, Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Hans von Dohnanyi. Resistors against Hitler in Church and State. That's a mouthful. This book tells us a little about the German resistance through the participation of Dietrich and Hans. And I think listeners will love learning about the people who inspired you to write the full-length play that is coming up in 2 weeks.
Hard to believe. Well, I've read a lot of books by Bonhoeffer and about Bonhoeffer, but this is really one of my favorites to recommend to people. And what I love about it is that it situates Bonhoeffer in the context of his family. A lot of books about Bonhoeffer, they focus mainly on him, and everyone else is just kind of maybe a supporting character. But this one, Hans, is really front and center, which I think is really the role that he played in Bonhoeffer's life. It's also a pretty slim little book, and it's very readable. It was written by Elizabeth Sifton and Fritz Stern. Sifton was the daughter of Reinhold Niebuhr, one of Bonhoeffer's professors at Union Theological Seminary when he did a fellowship there. Sifton was a book editor and publisher in New York, and she worked at a number of major publishing houses. She was really a very well-known person in the publishing world. She died in 2019. Fritz Stern, the co-author, was Sifton's husband, and he was a leading German historian. He died in 2016. And before his family escaped Nazi Germany, when he was a young child, his parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents knew the Bonhoeffer family quite well.
So it's interesting because this book is written by people that have had some firsthand knowledge here.
Right.
Of Dietrich and Hans.
Right.
You know, Nancy, we grew up watching World War II on TV, thanks to our father.
World at War.
Oh my God.
PBS.
We were just little kids and we knew all about the Holocaust, unfortunately.
Yep.
I have strong feelings about all of this from way back then. And I have spent all this time trying to figure out from a psychological and social context, how in the world did this happen? What was going on? What was the church doing? What were the people's thoughts on this? How did this crazy person get into power? As an adult, I've answered some of the, how does this crazy person get into power? Because that's knowledge, and a lot of history is written in, these are the steps. This is how this happened. This is how the Nazis became in power. And then there's all of that information on the war. This tank, this fight, this is how we gobbled up all these countries. My interest in World War II is really what was going on with the people, what were their thoughts, What was their culture? What was the church saying with this? What was the morality of scooping up all of these people? I liked this book because it entertained those themes more than other things that I have read.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a thin book, it cannot answer all of that for me, but it does entertain some thoughts there. My recommendation is for people that are interested in understanding that part of World War II, that it might spark some interest in those areas with them.
Previous to the start of World War II, Bonhoeffer had really only been active in ecclesiastical matters. When you talk about, well, where was the church during all of this? Before Hitler took power, the church was broken up into, I think it was 26 or 27 regional churches, Lutheran churches across Germany. They had a lot of independence. And one of the first things that Hitler did was realizing he needed to take control of the churches because the Lutheran church was so important to most Germans. 2/3 of all Germans were Lutherans. Even though a lot of people weren't necessarily observant, the church played a very important role in the life of the country. And so Hitler said, okay, we're going to combine all of these regional churches into the Reich Church, and we are going to control it. Of course, very early on, Bonhoeffer was very opposed to this and battled for 8 years against the Nazification of the Lutheran Church and led an illegal seminary for a while, just did lots of things. But it was really Hans, his brother in law, who exposed him to how he might be involved politically, so outside of just ecclesiastical matters. So, this book, I think, really tells that story well. Bonhoeffer was a pacifist and he did not want to fight, even though he had been called up to the draft near the start of World War II. And Hans offered him a way to not have to sign up for the military by creating a position for him in the Abwehr, that's the German military intelligence. And from there, Hans also recruited him to become involved in the German resistance. And the Abwehr, strangely, was kind of a core center for the German resistance. So they were the German military intelligence, but they were also working, many of them, at cross purposes to Hitler's aims. So I really like the way the book handled all of that, the way it highlights Hans's role and tells a story that is a story that in the United States we're not necessarily that familiar with, that whole idea about the German resistance. What did you know about the German resistance before reading this book?
Well, I the only thing I can say I really knew about it was the Valkyrie movie with Tom Cruise, and that he loved his country. He was a Nazi, but he didn't agree with the madman on lots of issues, and that there were other people high up in the Nazi regime that felt the same way. But to be found out meant your death. Besides that movie, I didn't know very much about it.
Yeah.
At all. The book is interesting because it does talk about some of the attempts and some of the long legwork that it took just to come up with one plot.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the plot to kill Hitler. Lots of people could have had a gun and killed him, but that would have meant for you to be mobbed and killed, as a result. It's the setup of the new government. It is the allies. It's all of the legwork and laying that foundation for the new government. And some of this book does talk about Dietrich and Hans in negotiating with Europe. Okay, like if we overthrow them, are you guys on our side? It shows how hard it was to do all of that. It would have been easy to kill Hitler. Anybody could have done that. But it was all of the other things that are underneath there that were really challenging to put together.
Yeah, because they love their country and they didn't want their country to be cast into even worse, like civil war or have it be completely destroyed by the Nazis. If they were really wanting to set up a government, they wanted the Allies to help them and support them. But it's morally very ambiguous.
It really is. It surprises me that after all of this, that you would still love your country
Yeah.
to the extent that people do. And in trying to understand this, and I've thought a lot about this subject, I don't know that I have the same sense of the United States. Yes, this is my home. This is where I'm happy. These are where my people are. This is where I want to be. But I don't know that I'm heroic. I don't know that I am maybe more in love with myself than the country. I don't know. He at times leaves the country to save his own soul, basically. And so you see the struggle. It is not just a black and white. There's just, the more you learn, even about the social context, the religious context, the political context, it does seem like the more you learn about this subject, the deeper it is and the more gray areas exist around this whole subject. Much too long for us to handle here in a half hour.
Yeah. I think the challenge that I had in writing the play was not to be swept away by either delving into tidbits that didn't matter or trying to paint the characters as too black or white.
Mm-hmm.
Some people made horrific decisions and were truly evil people. But in the end, most Germans were just people trying to get on with their lives. And I think growing up, I didn't understand that nuance. I thought Germany was bad and the Allies were good. And maybe it wasn't exactly clear in my head where Italy and Japan fit in. Somehow they were a part of the Axis too, but Germany seemed like the super bad place. Hopefully, as adults, we do understand a little more nuance. I think that you're right with the officers who joined the resistance, especially they lived in a very gray area. And here they were fighting for Germany and basically for National Socialism. But yet they also knew that Hitler was very bad for the country. But sometimes it was just because he was ruining their chances of winning the war. I mean, they they wanted to win the war. It's not, for some of them, it wasn't because they disliked Nazi policies or were against the Holocaust. They just wanted Germany to win, and they thought Hitler was ruining their chances. So there were a lot of pretty despicable people who were a part of that resistance. I think Hans and Bonhoeffer, they had in some ways much purer motives. Hans, I think, was really motivated by justice and patriotism. He was horrified by what was happening to not just the political enemies of the state, but obviously the Jews as well. Hans had many close Jewish friends and was absolutely disgusted very, very early on, even at the start of the small oppressions that started against the Jews. And of course, as it went on, he just was horrified by it, as anyone should be. And also Bonhoeffer, who came at this from a love of country, but love of his church and also love of humanity. So he, like Hans, was horrified by what was happening with the Jews. But there were some truly despicable people who were involved in the mass murders of Jews and Russian POWs, especially. And when I learned more about some of these people, I decided I really wanted to include some of that moral ambiguity in the play. And the person I especially highlight is Rudolf von Gersdorf. He was an aristocratic German officer who definitely was involved in some of the mass murders that happened. But he was also willing to give his life in an attempt to kill Hitler. So he was core to one plot. He had packed himself full of explosives with 10-minute fuses. He was going to detonate those fuses as he met Hitler at a military exhibition. And he was going to watch as the timer timed down. And right before he was going to be exploded, he was going to throw his arms around Hitler and basically commit suicide and kill Hitler at the same time. and the rest of the resistance was ready to take over the government. But Hitler went through the exhibit really, really fast, like in 3 minutes or something, when they were expecting him to stay a half an hour. And so he did not get a chance to throw his arms around Hitler, but he was able to defuse the bomb. So yet another failure. I think I understood there was something like 40 attempts to murder Hitler that all failed. And of course, he, ended up committing suicide is how he died. Bonhoeffer is in a unique place because he's a pacifist and he's a Christian, and he doesn't want to fight in the war, but he at first really is struggling with, can he take the life of another person, even Adolf Hitler? Ultimately, he does decide that he will be a part of the assassination attempts and decides that he is guilty no matter what he does. He's guilty if he does nothing. He's guilty if he ends up succeeding in murdering another human, and decides that it is up to God's ultimate judgment. And it's only through God's grace and mercy, through the person of Christ, that he will find forgiveness. I think this book, and what I think is really important about his life, is how world of events really put him in this exquisitely terrible place, and how he tries to find his way through it. I don't know that there are any huge life lessons for any of us that are going to apply. It's not like any of us will model our lives after his life. His life was unique to his time, but I think learning about his life and the decisions he made and the ethical principles that he followed, I think are helpful. So that's a long answer to what we were talking about. Any ethical dilemmas in this biography that stood out to you?
Well, there's a couple. I guess the one to really think about for me, I have no political power, except for I can march or I can write letters, whatever.
Yeah.
As a mom, however, I love the women in your play. That struck me most reading the first play is the women. Because my identity, I might not be able to relate on Dietrich. I'm not a pastor, but I'm a Christian. I'm not a political powerhouse.
Yeah.
I just live here. But I identify to the women in the story. And Hans's wife, who is Dietrich's sister, she is a part of the resistance.
Yeah.
In World War II, if you were found out like your husband is a part of the resistance, hey, your kids, you're probably going to be hauled off to a concentration camp. So your actions affect your entire family.
Yeah.
So the moral dilemma for me is, this is my cause. This is on me. But I'm a mom. So if I'm gone, what's going to happen to the little ones? Are they going to be thrown in a concentration camp? Or are they going to be raised by crazy people?
Yeah.
Are they going to be murdered, along with me? What's going to happen to them? And that to me is a tough decision.
Yeah.
I guess I grapple with it, Nance, because I don't have an answer. I can't almost put myself in that position. Like, if that really was your life, what would you do? So I have a great admiration for Christine and the other women who were a part of any of the resistance, whether it was the French resistance, whoever, the people that are going up against this, because their lives were at stake. That's number one. But you're putting your little children at risk too. And boy, that's a tough one.
Absolutely. I think if you're a mother, the number one thing you want to do in your life is protect your children.
It's genetic.
Yeah.
There's a force there that takes over, that is completely hidden until you're a mother. And then all of a sudden it comes out.
Yeah.
And it is there. And it is still there.
Yeah.
There is something, it will never ever end.
And at this point, Christine and Hans's children they're little kids. And they would have known that at this point, when parents were apprehended who were a part of the resistance, Those kids, you're right, they went off to good Nazi families to be raised in the good Nazi way. And they would have been told that their parents were terrible people. And that would have been that. Now, the lucky thing is that even though Christine was arrested when Hans was, she was released in 2 weeks. And so she was able to be reunited with her children. But I cannot imagine the terror. You and your husband are both in jail. And what is happening to your children?
Uh, I don't
Yeah.
know. But that makes me feel better. So you don't think that the kids, she would have thought that these kids would end up killed or in a concentration camp or a political prison camp or something?
Yeah, her kids were young enough. They probably would have gone to a childless Nazi family.
Oh,
They would have gone to another officer's family to be raised in the good Nazi way, which would be even more horrifying.
mm,
Like, you don't want your child to be raised by people who are spouting lies and who are fundamentally opposed to everything that is true and right and good in the world. I mean, you do
right.
not want your child raised under that kind of propaganda either.
No.
I don't know if you remember that the children were really used by the Nazis, children in general were really used by the Nazi party to rat out their parents. In schools, they would ask, "Oh, has anyone in the classroom ever seen their mother or father do these things?" And they were ways to try to find out if parents were involved in undermining the regime. So I think as a parent, that would be very hard too, because you don't want to put your child in the situation where they are inadvertently ratting you out, but you also don't want your child to think that everything they are hearing and seeing is what you agree with either. It just really ended up tearing families apart.
Yeah, because those kids were old enough for you to go, oh, no, you do not speak to even Jews that way.
Right.
Anybody would be like, oh, no, 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 no. No, that is, we're not doing that, or that's wrong. What's happening in that situation? Well, my mom said, the teacher says, well, my mom said you're supposed to treat everybody with respect.
Uh-huh.
It just opens up all of these situations. And oh my goodness, Nancy, so complex.
It really is. Do you remember Mr. Barry teaching us in sixth grade about the teachers being used to find kids whose parents were resistors?
Nancy, I don't I don't think World War II was part of our training in sixth grade. I remember learning about
No.
Alaska. Was it Alaska sixth grade? Nazi Germany? Did we learn World War II in sixth grade?
This may have been Mr. Barry extemporaneously telling us what easy little lives we had, as he sometimes did kind of go off on tangents and tell us we should be thankful
that he wasn't interrogating you.
I loved Mr. Barry, but he did kind of go off on tangents sometimes. And I definitely remember him at several points talking about German teachers trying to trap kids into saying things about their parents.
Wow, I don't remember that at all. And it wasn't Alaska, it was Latin America. That's what he
Oh, you're
taught
right.
us.
We did learn about Latin America in sixth grade. Yeah.
Very nice man, but no, I don't remember that. That's really funny that you remember that. So when kids are asked to turn in their parents, because nobody can be trusted, only the Nazi organization can be trusted, the effects of that end up destroying families in some ways, because your parents almost can't be trusted. It's just the government that can be trusted. So their aim was to strengthen Germany, but you can only do that if families are not an important structural component of their community in some ways. I mean, it's undermining.
Well, it is, even though the Nazis said that the German family was at the core of what Germany was all about, but they used families and they used those intimate relationships and destroyed them. Now, the Bonhoeffer family, they were all very unified against the Nazis. The entire family found that takeover of their country reprehensible. But I'll tell you, they paid a price. Dietrich's parents, Karl and Paula had 4 boys and 4 girls. This was a very elite family in Germany at the time. He was one of the best known psychiatrists in the entire country. And she came from an aristocratic family, and they were highly educated. And all of their children were educated at the best universities and went on, the boys, to very high positions. This was a patriotic family from centuries past. So that family, though, 4 boys, 4 girls, they lost their first son, who died fighting in World War I. They lost 2 additional sons, Dietrich and Klaus, because of their involvement in the resistance in World War II, and also 2 sons-in-law. So Hans, who we're talking about, and then Rudiger Schleicher. So of their 4 boys, 3 boys were killed because of Germany's involvement, basically, in 2 world wars. Only 1 son survives, and 2 sons-in-law are also killed. But the whole family, from the very beginning, were very against Hitler, and Dietrich especially was very far-seeing about the ultimate consequences of the country glomming on to who they must have seen as a charismatic figure. Although I think in today's age, we look back and he just seemed a cartoon character, basically. I mean, he just seems like this ridiculous person. But for Germany at the time, a very charismatic person. Bonhoeffer was on the radio just a day after Hitler is named chancellor, and he is on a national radio program warning people of idolizing any leader that promises to solve all their problems. In this address, he says it's against the Führer principle. And Führer would, at that time, just have meant leader. So he's against this idea of the great leader, sometimes referring to that as the Superman, the idea that there's this super person who is going to solve their problems, and they just need to be obedient and follow this super person. And so one really prescient quote from that address that Bonhoeffer gives is this: "Everyone who misappropriates the eternal law and concedes responsibility to a Superman will in the end be destroyed by him." And he was right.
Wow. So, Nance, well, so this would have been what, 1930 what?
1933.
Wow, he saw him for who he was
He
then.
did.
He had the foresight to know what would happen to their country.
Yep.
I often got the opinion in reading this book and the other book that we did last year that he kind of realized Hitler probably wasn't as smart
Yeah.
as he was projecting himself to be.
Yeah.
And they kind of saw through the propaganda
Yeah, definitely.
and the pomp and circumstance to somebody who wasn't really that educated and really wouldn't have the know-how on how to make the country great.
Right. I think he and his family just saw through that veneer of, we're going to make Germany a better place, and saw very much behind it the brutality that already was a part of the Nazi movement, and the inhumanity and the desire to scapegoat others. They saw that very early on.
I like the part in your play. It did not come out in this book. That a turning point for him, sort of that aha moment that he didn't like about himself, was when his twin sister married a Jew, which was fine. But when her husband's father passed away, she asked Dietrich if he would preside over it, be the pastor's.
Right.
And he said no.
Mm-hmm.
And he regretted that.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like that was a turning point for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, I should have done it. Who cares what the church says? I should have done this.
Yeah.
And that was sort of one of those points of moral reckoning for him, that he needed morally to do what God wanted him to do. And through that self-examination, kind of pivoted a bit in a different direction.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think at that point, I think that he did kind of steel himself against whatever the church was becoming, and realizing he was going to be someone very different.
Yeah.
It would have been very difficult, because so many in the church were going along. Even at the time, you can find headlines in the early 1930s in American newspapers that are saying Hitler is the right man for Germany. He will help Germany get out of this depression and lead them to a brighter future. He's the political leader they need. Of course, so many people in Germany believed that too. Part of it was propaganda, but part of it was this idea that he really had the right ideas for the time and that he would be the one that could really help Germany. And only a few people were really seeing through all of that, unfortunately. One of the most poignant quotes from this book, I think, comes from Dietrich's father, who, after the war, is trying to make sense of everything that has happened. And again, highly educated man, one of the most renowned psychiatrists in Germany, which is saying something. He wrote after the war, "How was it possible that a regime that openly manifested human brutality, violated the law in every way, intentionally exterminated valuable people and indispensable human capital, and displayed corruption and immeasurable human arrogance, how could such a regime maintain itself with the German people for 12 years and command millions of followers?" And he answers his own question with ceaseless propaganda, intimidation, and mass manipulation.
Right. So that kind of brings us back to the beginning, Nance, because that was the questions that I've always had.
Yeah.
Like, how could this have happened? Not from the laws and all of that. I respect this man. He's in my field, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
I believe he's a psychologist, right? Psychiatrist. Okay. So a little bit different field. But at that time, I think most doctors were toiling in the therapy pool. That's kind of the way into that. But in trying to understand that. So his answer here was the propaganda, which is true. Intimidation, which is very true. And being afraid that you're going to be put to death. Yeah. And manipulating everyone. Yeah, Nance, good book. I think it's a good read for people that want to know about the German resistance, the toll it took on the people that were doing it. But also I go back to Christine, the toll it took on her. Now, she was definitely a part of the resistance. It does bring to light not only some of the people that were high up in it and what they did, but the effect that this, as you're reading it, you feel like this is really risky. It's risky for the people that they love. Yeah. It's a good historical perspective of, okay, this is what happened first, and then this, and then this, and then this. And they line up all of these events in both of their lives in a chronological order so that you can see how the movement progresses. What about you, Nance? What are your thoughts on it?
I like how the book dispels that notion of one solitary brave person and really talks about the network that Bonhoeffer lived in and how what he did was in the context of his family, within the context of other people who were involved in the resistance. And that movement, while ultimately it failed, there were people in Germany who were working against the Nazis. And these were everyday people who were willing to risk everything that they were and everything they loved to overturn an evil regime.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a deep book. Yeah. And it lines up perfectly with our next episode, because our next episode is all about your play. And I get to ask you questions about your play. And we're also going to have the director, Timothy Shaw. He is going to be, so I get to ask you questions. I get to ask him questions, and we get to know more about our play. And and so that was what we wanted to read, a book about Dietrich and then get into your play as our second drop of the month on our front porch. So I look forward, Nancy.
I don't know what this is going to be like to be on the other side of the microphone answering questions.
Well, I think I'm liking this new sense of power I have. Hopefully it won't get in my head. But I'm looking forward to it.
I'm going to be kicked off the podcast.
No.
Linny's going to enjoy hosting this as a solo so much that come April, it's going to be, well, Nancy has decided to move in a different direction. And now I am the sole host of the Front Porch Book Club.
That'll never happen. That'll never happen. But I am going to enjoy it just for 30 minutes, I must say. I will have to be well rested to be able to do this, but I look forward to
well, me too.
To showcasing your play on our next episode. I can't wait.
Well, I'm really glad that Timothy's going to be able to join us because he brings a whole lot to this whole endeavor. And I know our listeners will enjoy meeting him and hearing from him as well.
Woohoo!
Well, I can't wait. So listeners, check out the Front Porch Book Club website at frontporchbookclub.com. And don't forget to sign up for our fun monthly newsletters.
Our episodes come out twice a month, the first and third Wednesdays of each month. If you like our show, be sure to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. And thanks, Linny. See you next time.
Okay, see you later, Nancy.
Bye-bye.